Once again, I'd like to welcome you all to our August 3rd Thursday. Tonight is the first of a two-part conversation we'll be having with three fantastic debut authors. Tonight we'll be talking about the path leading up to publication, and in November, we'll all reconvene to talk about publication day and the beyond. Our first panelist tonight is Sarah LaBrie. Sarah LaBrie is a TV writer, memoirist, and librettist. She was most recently a producer on the HBO and Starz television show Minx. She has also written on Blind Spotting, Made for Love, and Love, Victor. Her libretti have been performed at Walt Disney Concert Hall with music written by Pulitzer Prize-winning composer Ellen Reed. Her fiction also appears in Guernica, the Literary Review, and the Los Angeles Review of Books. Her first book, a memoir entitled No One Gets to Fall Apart, will be published by HarperCollins this fall. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Awesome. We're also joined tonight by Erin Quinn-Kong. Erin Quinn-Kong is a longtime magazine editor and brand new author. Currently managing editor at Texas Highways, she was also editor-in-chief of Austin Monthly and an editor at Allure and Us Weekly. Erin is a graduate of the University of Missouri School of Journalism and lives in Austin, Texas with her husband and their two children. Hate Follow is her debut novel. Thank you so much for joining us, Erin.
Thanks for having me.
And our third panelist is Cherry Lusai. Cherry Lusai is a writer and playwright originally from the Philippines, currently based in Brooklyn, New York. She received her BA at the Gallatin School of Individualized Study at NYU and her MFA in playwriting from Brooklyn College, where she has also been an adjunct lecturer in the English and American Studies departments. Cherry is also a teacher with PEN America's Dreaming Out Loud. She has received fellowships and residencies from Bona, Tin House, and elsewhere. Love Can't Feed You is her debut novel. Cherry, thank you so much for being here.
I am very glad to be here.
Okay. And so, I don't want to throw you all for a loop too much, but I know in my email to you all, I said I would ask this question last, but I've decided to move it up to first. Because all of your books are so wonderful and different. I really do think hearing a bit about them will help give context to what we're going to talk about tonight. So I would love for each of you to briefly tell us about your debut books. Erin, would you start for us, please?
Sure. So my debut is called Hate Follow, and it's about a influencer named Whitney Golden, who's a widowed mother of four. And when the book starts, she's at the peak of her career. She has 1 million followers. She lives in Austin, Texas, obviously. But her carefully curated life comes crashing down when her 15-year-old daughter, Mia, tells her she no longer wants to be part of the social media empire. And when her mom says, well, you can't, then she sues her for invasion of privacy.
Thank you. And Cherry, would you tell us about your debut book?
Sure. My debut novel is called Love Can't Feed You. It follows a Chinese Filipino family, centering the voice of the protagonist, Queenie. She is 17-year-old at the beginning of the novel, but we follow the family for 5 years. So we see her grow up and assimilate to America and the American dream as her family disintegrates. And it is not the American dream, but an American nightmare. So that is what the book essentially is about.
Thank you. And Sarah, would you tell us about your debut book?
My book is called No One Gets to Fall Apart. It's a memoir. And it is about the year after my mom was diagnosed with late in life schizophrenia and sort of the chaos that ensued as my family tried to navigate that without any sort of guidelines or any understanding of even the language around mental illness. And I was sort of exploring the repercussions, not only of her diagnosis, but of sort of the long simmering mental illness that she'd had while she was raising me. And then, so that's sort of a book about ambition and legacy and the inheritance of mental illness. And there's also a thread of Walter Benjamin, who's a German theorist I'm obsessed with, who wrote a book called The Arcades Project about basically the history of modern Paris, this massive sort of impossible undertaking. So it's also about, there's a theory thread through it as well.
Thank you. Like I said, these are all wonderful and different, and I know you'll want to pre-order them. But to jump into what we're talking about, this path leading up to publication, how did you know that you were done with your manuscript? And I know done is a loaded word, but by done in this context, I mean you felt ready to bring someone else into your process. You wanted to bring on an agent. And Cherry, I'd love to start with you. How did you know that your novel was ready?
So I think in my case, I was a bit premature because when I, at least for myself, when I was working on it, it's not like in playwriting, or I'm sure screenwriting is the same thing, where the process involves other people almost immediately because you need to hear it, you know? So I was bringing in people a little bit too early in the drafting process, and so that it was a bit difficult sometimes to parse where I was in terms of what I was trying to do and then what wasn't working for people, because I also come from an experimental background in playwriting. I studied under Erin Courtney and Mac Wellman at Brooklyn College, and that was the place for like experimental playwriting. And so everything I was doing was an experiment, you know, and that sort of went into the prose writing. And the interesting thing that happened as I was working on this novel, it became less experimental, and the more I chipped away at it, and to the point, I guess, when I did sign with my agents, and then they also told me, we need a little bit more threading here, because I was in my playwriting work, I don't do a lot of the typical narrative or classic arc. You know, I was very interested in different things like absurdity, you know, on repeating scenes that somehow don't make sense in the beginning, but because of the experience you have in the repetition of that manner, that, you know, you get meaning that way. But you can't do that in prose, right? It becomes redundant, and then you lose the interest of the reader. So it's not like, I guess, in theater where a person can choose to walk away or stay there, you know, for the duration, because there is such a thing as durational theater. So you can't do, well, I found I couldn't do that with what I was writing. And so I slowly chipped away at it. I had to actually stop showing it to people at some point and then just work on it a little bit. And then I brought in the work to other people later when I felt like I had something. But even then, it wasn't as, I don't want to say easy, because it's a totally different genre, a totally different part of my brain is working. It really is a simmer. It's a slow burn. It is not like a saute, which is sometimes how I sometimes think of writing plays. So, or grazing. Yeah, that's, I don't know if I answered your question completely. It's just different from, because I always fall back into how would I do this if I were writing a play.
Mm. So you showed it, you felt like too early, and then had to take some more time with it on your own, and then
Yeah.
bring your agent in.
Yeah, I mean, even later with the agents, I had to, they told me, okay, can you just sit down with this for a little bit and work on it some more, you know?
Yeah, we'll get into that kind of the work you do with an agent after you sign. But Erin, what about you? You look ready to let us know how you knew you were done.
Yeah. So I had written a book before this. And with that book, I queried it and I got a good bit of interest from agents, but I figured out pretty quickly that there wasn't quite enough of a hook. And then with this idea, I knew it was a really good hook. And because I'd already written a previous novel, I had kind of a writer community. So I had, people to send the book to, and I also got a mentor. I'm part of WFWA, which is the Writers or Women's Fiction Writers Association. And so they paired me with a mentor who read the whole book and gave me like a 6-page edit letter after I'd been working on it for about a year. And so once I had done, taken her revisions, and then showed it to more people, it kind of just got to the place that it was like, okay, it's ready. There, like, I don't know what else to do with it at this point. And so that's when I started querying. And I also think because, all of us are bringing our different backgrounds. For me, every magazine story we write or edit, multiple people are looking at it all the time. So you kind of just get to a point that it's done, like there's either you've got to send it, you got to get it out the door, or you've got to get someone else to look at it. And so for me, it was like, okay, my kind of readers have all read it. They all, I've put in their changes that I'm going to put in, and then I just had to put it out to agents and see if anyone bit.
Mhm. Sarah, what about you? What was your experience like? Oh, you're on mute still.
How did I know when I was done?
Yeah,
That's
how
the
did you
question.
know you were ready to bring in an agent or to, yeah, get to that next part of the
I I
process?
was trying to sell another book through my agent, like a novel that I had been working on for years and years. And sort of I wrote this book out of frustration as that book was collapsing and it kind of getting to a point where even though no one was saying it, I could kind of tell it was just gonna hit a wall. So this book kind of came out of the pure emotion of that frustration. And then so I had an agent, and then I ended up getting a different agent. I fired that agent for stuff around the first book, and then I got a different agent, and then that agent, she was just so good at her job that I really, really trusted her. And at a certain point, she was like, "This is ready to go out." And I don't think I would have known that. I wouldn't have known it was ready to go out to editors, but she said it was, and she was right. So
Yeah, that's great. And to stick with you, Sarah, um, when you the agent search process, what were you looking for in an agent and how did you go about finding one?
yeah, I got my MFA at NYU, and they do a thing at the end of your last year where you have kind of a round table kind of speed dating thing with agents. It's like a whole afternoon where you go in and you meet them, and then they have you get like a one-on-one session with like 4 people, and that's where I met my current agent, and then my first agent was actually in my class at NYU, so it was all through NYU.
Oh, wow. Um, and Cherry, what about you? When you started looking for representation, what were the things you were looking for? How did you build your list for people to send your work to?
So I had a list already, but then I was contacted by the agents who I'm represented by now on their own. They had found me and like an excerpt of my work through Catapult when that was still active. I had taken the 1 year generator again because I did not have the discipline or the patience to sit down and actually write a book. Again, it's a totally different discipline. And after the generator, a part of like maybe 3 pages of my book was on the website. I had read it and they contacted me, so they offered representation after they read the novel. But I wasn't sure yet at that time. So I had other agents that I was looking at, and what I was looking for really was who I thought would represent literary fiction. And I looked at those agents who represented people I like, but maybe I was aiming a little too high, so some of them were super busy. And there's a thing that happens when an agent offers representation, you can nudge the other people that you've submitted to, and suddenly they will put you on their to be read pile like yesterday, and so I had communication with, so I only submitted to about 5 agents. So I got my responses. Most of them were no. One of them was she disappeared, but that's because she had a baby and she just sort of disappeared. So then one agent had wanted a resubmission, but she did talk to me, and I agreed with some of the points that she had about the book. But I guess I ultimately signed with the people who were excited by the book right away, because one thing that I did glean from other people, you may want the star-studded people, to be in your team, but they may represent XYZ and they're not going to pay attention to you. You want an agent who will look at you like you are in their A team, and that they will give you the time of day, and so I thought about that, because I had spoken to other writers who mentioned that they really wanted that, that A-list agent, and that they had to revise, resubmit, waited for a year, got in, and they're happy with their agent. But I've also talked to other writers who felt that they weren't being given enough attention from their agent because they had other clients who were bigger names. So I just ended up with agents who were new to the industry. They were hungry, and so they are very invested in my success, and so I think this might be a better fit.
Oh, that's really great. Thank you for sharing that. Erin, what about you when you were sending out queries? What were the things you were looking for in an agent? How did you build your list?
So, I mean, I just did all the classic stuff, query tracker, publishers, marketplace, manuscript wish list. I went through the slush piles. Like with my first novel, I queried, I think, about 90 agents. And then with the second book, with Hate Follow, it was probably about the same number, but a lot of the ones, especially the ones who had requested a full on the first book, when you say, hey, you read my last book, I didn't find representation, but maybe you'll like this, that gets a much quicker response. And so even though that book didn't go anywhere, it definitely was still valuable, because I learned about the process, but also I think you kind of rise to the top, because they're like, oh, I may remember the name, or just it shows that, you kind of know what you're doing. You've done it before, I guess. Yeah, so I just did, I made the list based on who was looking for book club fiction, authors that I like, and also social media books, that kind of thing. And any kind of book, there's been a huge amount of social media books in the last few years. So I looked at all of those agents. And then I ended up going with the agent who really just loved my book and understood it from the beginning. Like, she just got it. And So that I think the whole it really takes just one, it really, really does.
Yeah, thank you. And so, Erin, how much between signing and your book going out on submission, how much editing did you do with your agent?
So with my agent, we put in a few scenes. She had really good, I think she gave me like 5 points to think about. And I think I did 4 of the 5. I think one, I don't even remember, I didn't want to do, and we just discussed it and decided not to do it. And so I revised that. And then there were like a few little tiny things before it went out. So she signed with me around Thanksgiving 2022, and we went on submission in March 2023. Yeah, and then with my editor, I don't know if you're gonna ask this, but with my editor, I did another big round and then a small round again, and then copy edits and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it was a lot. It was a lot of revising after I thought it was done. It was not.
Yeah. Sarah, what about you? How much editing did you do with your agent? How much back and forth was there with you all on getting the book ready to submit?
I think I did about 3 rounds, but I am a TV writer, so there was like a year in there. Oh no, that was with my editor when I was on a show and I had no time to do anything on the book, so it took a really long time. I think I signed with this agent in 2019. The book sold in 2021, and it's coming out in October. So it's been a years long process, but because of my work schedule, and then because like I I the question she kept asking me is like, why did you write this book? What do you want out of having written this book? And I think I really needed to write my way into an answer to that question because it's a really important question. And the reason I had written my first book was because I wanted to write and sell a book and be an author. And that wasn't good enough. Like my first book didn't get out there into the world for a reason, and probably in part because of that. And so I kind of realized like with this book, like it needs to be really, really clear to the reader why this book exists. It can't just be a chronicle of a tragic year in my life and my mother's life. There needs to be a point. And that was a really slow, like very iterative process of just writing and rewriting. And I was lucky because my agent, Claudia Ballard, is like extremely honest and like extremely blunt. So if she didn't like something, she would be like, this is boring, you know? And like I personally respond very well to like very direct feedback. And I don't know, I just felt like that whole process of like, not good enough, do it again, like was worth it and slow and long, but like made me a much better writer and made the book what it needed to be.
Absolutely. Cherry, what about you? What was your editing process like with your agent?
So I had done maybe 3 revisions also, and the back and forth was so bad. Because I was so undisciplined, and I envy people in, I guess, publishing or even in the magazine industry, because your turnaround is so quick, right? In Erin's case, and then you already have editors working with you right away, and then you have copy editors, and things just move very quickly. And I think that hones the writing skill very quickly. So I didn't have that, everything is sort of slow burning. And so what happened was that I did not take feedback very well in the beginning, because I would think it was one thing, but it's something completely different. It got to the point where they asked me, can you maybe ask a friend writer to like look through this, and that's the other thing that I tell people, have a writing community, because, and I think someone in the Q&A section put it You need that. You need your beta readers. You need people who will, like Sarah L was saying, that someone who will be blunt with you, but also you being okay with that feedback, you know, that you trust that this is a source who is only looking out for me and not to tear me down, you know. And so um again, I keep going back to the playwriting because that is the world that I was most familiar with prior to you know, focusing on the manuscript. And I mean, I had folks in some writing workshops who would tell me, oh, but you already have an MFA, so you should know this process. And then I'm thinking, no, because we don't even, okay, this is how different it is. When you're doing a script, you don't need to read the script off the you know, off the class. You read it during the class or during the session with the actors or whatever, right? Or just readers in general, and you hear it. But you can't do that with a piece of fiction, you know, with prose. You'd be there for days. So a lot of reading and interpreting happens before that, you know, in script world and crafting and, you know, that type of environment. So I wasn't used to the whole kind of MFA type process, right? So there were folks telling me that, oh, I have no MFA in playwriting. I mean, in fiction. So, but you have an MFA in playwriting. So you know what you're doing and you have connections. Like, no, people in my world do not know how to do what you're talking about. And so I didn't really, and that's where the community comes in, right? Where if you have an entire manuscript, not everyone has the patience or knowledge or wisdom to be able to sit down and read an entire manuscript and give you the appropriate feedback that you need, you know? So, and it's basically your child. You're gestating this project or this creative piece, and you trust it with just anyone. So you also have to be careful of the feedback that you're getting. Is it aligned to what you're trying to say? You know, something Sarah L was talking about earlier, that um, why this story? So that's always going to be something that you have to answer for yourself. I mean, yes, people will ask that, but for yourself, you have to be clear why this story matters to you, or why are you the one to have to tell this story? Because I mean, it is a slog, you know, so it has to matter to you before it matters to somebody else.
That is great advice. And Cherry, I know you mentioned knowing if you're, you know, knowing where you stand with your agent in terms of where they are in their career and if they're hungry, you know, that's something you looked for, someone who you're going to grow with in career. Are there any other, for folks out there like joining in tonight that are kind of maybe in this process, what advice would you give them for what should they ask before they sign with an agent? What are things they should look out for? What advice would you give?
Just thinking about what's important to you. Is it that they have a hands-off style? Are they editorially oriented? You know, do you want that? I mean, who are you as a writer? Do you want people always checking in on you? And so it's like dating, I would say, right? I think that's something I often hear from folks. You're going to enter into a business relationship with this person, you know, and there could be money involved, there could be no money involved, right? And once you enter a transactional relationship, I feel like you need to be super clear about your own priorities. And again, do they align with this agent that you're trying to pursue? Or are you just thinking, oh, I want the career that they had cultivated for this writer, like exactly the same. I mean, you have to think about can that be delivered? Is that possible? You know, what are your own priorities? Does the agent have a vision for you, or do you care about that? Do you just want to sell one book, or are you thinking about multiple books down the line? You know, so and that's something that when the agent when you talk to the agent, you ask those questions, like where do you see this going? You know, it's like asking the person, hey, are we gonna have kids? You know?
Yeah. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
Yeah. And it's interesting because when I was looking for agents, I did not know what I was doing. This is all in hindsight, you know. I didn't necessarily know what the chronology was. It was sort of all haphazard because I knew I wanted things, but then what was I willing to negotiate in order to get certain things done? And then like for example, I had this one agent who said, I am very interested, but I'm not gonna sign you yet. I need to see a revised version of your work. So I went from weighing that to the agents who said, we'll sign you like yesterday. It's like, come with us. We'll do whatever, you know? So I, at that point, thought that I needed for my mental health, I needed the validation and support that this team was offering me at that time, you know? Was that the priority I should have been looking at? I mean, again, I don't know. I chose who I chose, and I mean, I got the book sold with a Big Five publisher. I'm really happy with the editor I have and the editing process. So um, I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that everything happened the way how it happened.
Hmm. Those are great questions to keep in mind. Sarah, what about you? What questions would you advise people ask or think through at that stage?
Um, I would just say take your time. I think sometimes people get offers, maybe from a big name agent, and you think, oh my God, I have to take this. This is the chance of a lifetime. But kind of like Cherry was saying, like you don't know if that agent has way bigger clients and isn't going to pay attention to you, or it's even possible. Like we're in such a different era in the publishing industry than I think we've ever been in before. So you have to take that into account. Like some of those big name author careers were built in a time when that was possible in a way it's not right now. So you really have to like ask around, like ask other authors that those agents represent right now. Like, are you happy? Do they return your emails? Like, do you do you feel like it's a good fit? And like, here's my situation, because authors will talk to you, and don't feel intimidated to do that for like any size or brand of agent. It doesn't, you're hiring this person to sort of handle your career, and you need to have faith in them that they're going to do that, and I think, yeah, it's great. Like aim for like a big brand, big agency, for sure, but that's not necessarily the thing that's going to get you the book deal you want, the career you really have to, like, it's so specific to each type of person. And the only way to really, like, I think, not have regrets is to take your time with
That's fantastic advice. Thank you. And Erin, what about you? Do you have questions you suggest people think through or ask of agents before they sign?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the number one thing is they need to love your book. They need to absolutely love it. There should be no question in your mind that they love it and they know what you're going for. And you should talk to, yeah. Someone said, if you want an editorial agent or not. I think that's a huge thing. I really wanted someone who would talk through ideas with me and, do an edit of the book. But some people don't want that, so then if you don't want that, you have to find someone who doesn't do that. And then the other things I would say is to absolutely talk to their clients. you are absolutely allowed to ask them for clients and to set up calls with them and even investigate on your own and find people who've left them and ask why. I also think the biggest thing for me is communication style because, you know, I've heard so many when you're on submission, which is such a hard time. And I've heard some agents do spreadsheets and they'll put stuff in so you are notified immediately. Some agents don't tell you anything. And so you have to think about as a person, what do you want? You know, maybe you don't want to know. Maybe you want to know every piece of information, which is how I am. I wanted an update. So that's really important. And then something I just saw, which blew my mind. I think it was on Threads. I saw someone say, I just got Publishers Marketplace, and I realized that all the big agents on Twitter or X are not the ones making the big deals. So like, do not rely on Twitter as the place to find agents because your agent shouldn't have time to be tweeting crazy stuff. And those are not the people who are really, you know, making the deals. So I would definitely, yeah. Publishers Marketplace is $25 a month, which gets pricey if you're querying for a while, but you know, buy it for a month and really go through, you know, the agents who have the most debuts, the agents who are in your genre, and make a list and then see if they're open to queries. And those are the people you should be targeting versus someone who, you know, is well known on Twitter, I think, anyway.
That's great advice. And Erin, I'm going to stick with you because you brought up the submission process. What was your timeline like? How long was your book on submission? And did you get to talk to your editor before signing? If so, what was that conversation like?
Yeah. So I went on submission like March 2nd and of last year. And so funnily enough, I actually interviewed for my job the same day and I ended up getting it. And I think that was actually really helpful because I was like starting a new job. And so I could really forget that it was kind of going on. And then my agent was really good. So every agent, some agents do kind of small rounds. My agent did a good size round. I want to say maybe 15 editors in the first round. And then when she started getting feedback, people were pretty quick with feedback. And then when she started getting feedback, she did another round. And then my editor had only had it for a little less than 2 weeks when she let us know that she was interested. And so that was right before 4th of July. So I was on submission almost exactly 4 months. And then I talked to her right after the holiday, and then she offered, or maybe right before, and then she offered right after the holiday. So it was like, to me, I mean, some people could say 4 months is a really long time to be on submission, but to me, because I had all this other life stuff going on, it was fine, and it worked out really well.
And you mentioned you liked having all of the information from your
Yeah.
agent. And so she was sharing feedback as well, kind of as she was getting it.
Yeah. I try, everyone says, you know, protect your mental health, protect your mental health. Don't read reviews. I don't know if you guys are reading early reviews and all of that stuff, but I just think for me, the person I am, and I just need to accept it, is I want all the information. And so I started out saying to my agent, oh, don't tell me. But then within a few weeks, I was asking for it. And I was like, just send it to me. Because I just wanted to know that something was happening, you know? So that's just kind of, you know, there are people who don't want to know, and that's amazing. I just am not that person. And I've reconciled that with myself.
Mhm. Sarah, what about you when you went on submission? What was the timeline like for getting the publishing deal? And did you get to talk to your editor before signing?
Yeah, I everything happened pretty quickly. I think the editor who wound up buying the book was the first person to respond, and she responded almost right away. And then I had a call with her, which was just to sort of see how we vibed. And it was great. And then I left town for a few weeks. I was traveling. I kind of went on a belated post-COVID honeymoon because I got married right before COVID. And I think I checked in with my agent once, and she was like, kind of like I think it had maybe been 3 weeks, and she was like, I guess because she has really big name authors. I don't know. I didn't know how anything was supposed to work, but she was like, "Oh, this is weird. It's not, people are responding the way I thought they would, but as quickly as they would." And I was like, "Excuse me, like, please don't tell me that. I don't want to hear that. Like, please don't tell me any bad news." So I guess it was kind of the opposite of Erin. But in retrospect, it wasn't bad news. Like, it was fine. I don't because that original editor wound up buying the book. She did sort of like early enough that I guess it counted as a preempt. Like, it hadn't even really gone out to like that many editors. But then she did actually ask for one interesting thing because I didn't know this at the time, but I was her first acquisition. So to sell it to, I guess, the marketing department, because you know what happened, like the editor wants your book and then they have to like tell their boss and the marketing people, like, this is why I want this book, and everybody kind of has to decide. So sometimes an editor will want your book, but not be allowed by the company to acquire it. And so to strengthen her case, she asked me to write a letter basically explaining what the revision would look like that she could give to her boss. And I think that's why everything sort of was able to happen so quickly, because she was very good at her job, and she knew what her boss and what everybody else would want from the book, and kind of helped guide me into that lane. So I would say it was probably maybe a month, the whole process.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. And Cherry, what about you? What was your timeline like? And did you talk to your editor before signing?
Yeah, I think it's a given that you should talk to your editor before
Yeah.
signing
I guess
because
it's more what was the conversation like?
right, right. Yeah, it was 2 painful months, you know. And I think any writer on sub will tell you it is just a nightmare, you know. You are waiting and you don't know whether there's going to be an answer or not, because I do have friends who have gone on sub, like they got the agent, they did everything right, you know, and their work, it's good, right? But no editor had bought it because either, and there could be a lot of reasons, that they bought something very similar to it, someone beat you to it, you know, like all these things, right? Sometimes nothing to do with the author or the work itself. It's just the market or whatever. I have no idea. So it was 2 months, and then I did end up with the first editor who who we heard from. And I heard from another editor who wanted to preempt, you know, but just like what Sarah L was saying, he wanted to preempt. He was talking to, oh my gosh, you don't understand. This editor, he was talking to me about my book like I had never thought before. Like I was falling in love. I was thinking, I don't know who wrote this book, but sign me up, you know. That's how much he was selling my own book to me, okay? So I was very excited, but then I was on the call with my agent, you know, and then he he was just wowing me. And then he said, what can we do to sign you today? You know, and then, you know, my agent kicked me out of the call so that they could talk, you know, like it was, I was thinking, oh my God, you know, is this it? Is this the call that will change my life or whatever, right? 2 days later. Um, and you know, he asked me to send other stuff to him. 2 days later, I get this call from my agent saying, I am sorry to burst your bubble, but the editorial team said no, and that they would only, you know, take you on if you did a massive revision, you know, and because they couldn't see how that revision would be done. And when I kind of talked to that editor again later. He said he wished he had more time, and that if he had more time to work on my stuff, he could have asked me to do maybe that letter that Sarah was talking about as well. But because there was already an offer on the table, my agents advised me to just take that. and not wait, because they said, there might be a recession coming. We don't know. And sometimes what happens is that a big editor from one of the houses can say they're very interested if you revise, but then you bring back the revision to them and it's not what they were looking for, you get no offer at all. So they were telling me you have to weigh all of this. So they were advising me to take the one that was a solid offer, the one that not only was the editor fully on board, her entire editorial team was too. I mean, they were super, super excited, and so I breathed in and thought, go back to that initial impulse of who is the most excited about the work, because there are so many books being published, and if people are not excited about your work, they're not excited to talk about it for a million times, the book's not going to sell. Nobody's going to care, so you want the team who not only will take it, give you your advance or what have you, but that they will care for it like it is their child. Okay. You want the team who will put everything for you. Otherwise, there are a lot of experiences. Like if you mind the internet, you will read about all these experiences of authors who are so disappointed because their experience with the editor, their experience with their publishing house, it is not what they expected. So it doesn't end with you getting signed by an agent. It doesn't end with you getting signed by the editor. It doesn't, like there are always these constant benchmarks changing. So.
Oh, wow. What a ride. So Sarah, that kind of between signing with your editor and now, publication day pending, or coming up soon rather, how much did the book change under your editor's guidance? What kind of edits? You mentioned there was a specific letter of your editor's vision.
Yeah, it is almost a completely different book. I mean, I feel like the book that I submitted has the same basic narrative scaffolding because of Claudia, because of my agent. One of her things was like it needs a through line. And kind of like Cherry, I come from a more experimental background, and when it first started, it was kind of just a bunch of different vignettes, and it needed to be something that you could sit down and read all the way through and understand what the plot, so to speak, was. So that is all there, I would say. But in terms of the writing, my editor, Jenny Zhu, who's now at Simon and Schuster, basically had me sort of reorganize it along these three threads of the novel that I was trying to write, that I talked about earlier, that had fallen apart, and the frustration around that, my mother's mental illness and her diagnosis, and then my own sort of just present life, my relationships and a friendship I had that was falling apart, and my now husband, who I was kind of in the process of getting engaged to at that point. And so she was like, just follow those three narrative threads and then braid them together and make sure that they're kind of always present in each other, as opposed to trying to write about one, then the other, then the other. So that structurally was just the key. That ended up being the key to everything.
Yeah. And I think just with memoir, it's so interesting because you're still living your life, right, as you're writing it. And I think that, that makes it an interesting process to get to that done point.
That's definitely something that's come up. But I also think that now that the book is part of my life, it's kind of changed the trajectory of my life in a really interesting way. Which I would imagine is just the case for everyone who writes and publishes a book. I think obviously not just career-wise, but a lot of things have happened in my relationships and in my life that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't figured out a way to fit this story, like what happened to me, and to that really changed me psychologically. And hopefully, like, I don't know, the hope for this book is that other people who are in similar situations find it, and it kind of gives them a jumping off point for understanding what mental illness looks like and its repercussions and how to talk about it.
Absolutely. And so Erin, what about you? How much did your book change from the when you signed with your editor and now?
Yeah, so when we had our call, it was about 45 minutes, and she was like, you know, I love this, this, and this. And when we had our call, she had already had multiple people read it. So I'm assuming she didn't specifically say like she'd already talked to marketing, but multiple people had read it. And so she said, you know, I love your book, but these are the changes that I you know, am thinking about. And she kind of laid them out for me. And there was one big change I will tell everyone about, but mostly it was amping stuff up. So like there was a high school relationship, like let's see more of that, let's see more of this kind of thing. And the really big thing was, so my book originally had a trial in it, and it was toward the end of the book, and then after it was a few chapters. And she said, I don't want a trial because I think, you know, she was hoping to sell it to a few other countries, and the American law, she didn't want to kind of get into that. And she wanted kind of more of a more emotional ending. And so that was a little hard because everyone had liked the trial up to that point. And so that was difficult. And so then when I took the trial out, it was 2 chapters. My book is dual point of view, mother and daughter. So there's a, you know, mother, daughter. So I had to take those both out, and I had to keep the chapters after. So I kind of had to move everything. And so I had to figure out that puzzle. And then after I had thought about, you know, so I signed with her, thought about it. And then I asked for another call and said, okay, I think I can do these changes, but this trial thing, I need to talk to you about it. And so we talked through it. And I actually wrote an ending in the first revision. I wrote an ending, and I kind of knew it was a little bit much. And then the second time I got it. But that was, I mean, that was a huge change. But it was good. I did, the book sold in Taiwan, so, and hopefully a few other places. And so I don't know if that's why, like maybe, but that was her reasoning for it. And so I thought that was good enough reasoning to do it. So,
Yeah.
but it was hard. It was very hard.
Oh, that's so interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Terry, how much did your book change under the guidance of your editor?
I would say that like what Sarah was saying, I had a lot of vignettes, you know, so it was a lot of just threading the piece together. And I'm laughing because a lot of people think my book is a memoir. It is not, okay? I have friends who have asked me, so did this really happen? I am so sorry. Your life must have been, and I said, this is not me. It's a work of fiction. You know, I have to clarify with that, with a lot of people, just because I took a lot of elements, you know, from protagonist is similar to my background, Chinese and Filipino. I have a Chinese mom and a Chinese dad and a Filipino mom. I had that in the book. Like I immigrated here, the character immigrated here, you know, so for people it was like that is a sure way of saying, you know, this is the same exact person. And so there are elements that were happening in the book that people had assumed that it, you know, that happened to me, and I have to tell them it is not. Okay, it is not. Please, it is not. It is a work of fiction. So I'm just reminding myself that and to let people know it is not a memoir, you know, although it's interesting to me because people are reading it as memoir, and so that is super interesting just because it is a work of fiction. And so when you have a work of fiction that reads like memoir, like how, I mean, I have no control about how the reader is going to take that. They can think whatever they want, but I just think that that is interesting, you know. And I find myself in some conversations. So that's something I'm thinking about now, that because had used a mirror that is too close to my reflection, that people think that this reflection is the actual me, and so that was interesting, and that I find myself having to answer that in some arenas. And like I said, the change mostly is threading the pieces together, because I started out with even more vignettes, which is why it's not, the narrative is a span of 5 years, and instead of 1 year, it could have been a year. But no, it's a span of 5 years from when the protagonist is 17 to 23. And then the way how I did the pacing was different from the first half to the last half of the novel. So I really appreciated, and I think someone in the Q&A had talked about or asked, how did you choose your editor? If you only have one editor making an offer, I mean, I think sometimes you'll go with that editor, which is sort of what happened with me. But if you are in a position where your work becomes the hottest ticket in town, and then editors are fighting over it, and I have writer friends who have been in that situation. So a lot of the times for them, it was about how much was being offered to them, one, because money talks. Second, if money was not the issue, did the editor have the same vision as you do for the book? Because they can say, so I was just thinking about Erin's story about the court case. So what if Erin was really, really, really into that court case? Like, this is the heart of the book. And then the editor just told her, sorry, we got to take it out. Otherwise, I'm not going to buy it. And then you as the writer have to make that decision. Are you okay for this this integral scene to 2 chapters from the novel to be taken out, or are you going to go with the next one who may not offer you the same amount of money, but you get to keep what you wanted? So that's something that you have to think about.
Absolutely. I definitely will have to catch up kind of on this thread of how people are receiving your work when we get back together in November. I'd love to hear more about, how that evolves and how your, feelings about that evolve. But thank you for sharing that. That's super interesting. So the last question I have for you all, before we jump into the Q&A is, and you all answered this on the interviews I sent, but your answers were so lovely that I'd love to hear again, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit more. What advice would you give people who are working on their books right now, and they're hoping what they're working on will be their debut book? Erin, what advice do you have?
Yeah, my biggest two are probably, I think I realized, while querying and you're kind of getting this feedback, and it can be hard, and then submission and all of that, you really have to enjoy the work, because that's all you can control. You cannot control, how much money someone offers you, or what agent, wants to partner with you. You can't control your marketing, or, if you make a list or any of that, but you can control the work. So you really have to, like, if you have fun and enjoy it, I think that at the end of the day is, the goal. The other thing is, I feel like every literary event I go to, new writers say, like, what is your process? When do you write? How do you write? And I was totally like that at the start too. And I realized that you do not need to worry about anyone else's process, because you only can do what you can do. Stephen King writes 2 hours a day before, his wife brings him breakfast or whatever. Well, I don't have a wife bringing me breakfast, and I'm not Stephen King. So I have a full-time job now. Like Sarah was saying, that that makes things very different. And so if you can only write when your baby naps or after work, or I actually, it's fascinating once you kind of get into this world. I've seen writers or heard them say, I only write on Mondays for 2 hours and I just pound out thousands of words, So if that's you, that's all that matters. Just do what you can do. And then I think I also, like Cherry, have an amazing group of writers that I've become super close to. We Zoom once a month and we talk all day, every day on text. And I think that is so invaluable, both for encouragement, for reading your pages, and also just seeing other people's journeys because they're also different. And then just asking, questions or, so if you find someone you kind of gel with, you got to hold on to them tight because those people are, a big part of this whole thing and will make it a lot easier and more fun too.
Thank you. That's wonderful advice. Sarah, what about you? What is your advice for people who are working on what they hope will be their debut book?
It's hard, it's really hard and you have to try really hard. And I think sometimes, at least like, I don't know, I'm a millennial, so it felt like I don't know, there's like pressure to be like chill or like not careerist or something, but like I am so not chill and I am so intense and I tried so hard. I have had to work full-time jobs my whole life, like since I got out of college, and I was waking up at 5 a.m. and writing for 3 hours and going to my terrible office job and fundraising like that I had only gotten because I knew I would have a cubicle far away from everything and I would have a printer and I would write at my job and like I didn't have a plan B. Like I had to like I think sometimes people become writers and they're like, oh, I just got lucky. I met this person, I met that person. I did not get lucky. Like I fought, and I think it's just getting harder and harder now. I have friends who have books, amazing writers, amazing books that have been on submission for 7, 8 months. Like it's not getting any easier. It's okay to be ambitious. It's okay to organize your life around the thing you want. And then the flip side of that, I would say too, also is like you don't have to do it alone, like your editor is there to make your book better. So like don't feel like yes, be ambitious, aim as high as you possibly can, write your manuscript the best it possibly can be. But if you're like, this is 95% as good as it can be, look for an agent, like get it out there because it's their job to make it better and they want to do that. It doesn't have to be a New York Times bestseller or whatever your status is, like whatever your metric of like amazing writing is. Like it doesn't necessarily have to be 100% there. You might not be able to get it there by yourself. You need a writing group, you need editors, you need other people, and you need time. Like give yourself the time to.
Oh, thank you. That's wonderful advice. Cherry, what about you? What advice would you give people out there who are working on what they hope will be their debut?
So I'm going to echo a lot of what Erin and Sarah had said about, finding your own process and the grind. Oh my gosh, the grind. And because I'll keep going back to the finding a discipline that works for you, because no one's going to do what you need to do yourself. You are the one who has to go through the grind of writing every day, of submitting, of being rejected, picking yourself back up and then submitting again, and polishing, like all of this. And you have to protect yourself mentally, and spiritually and psychologically, because it is hard, not a lot of people can take rejection well. I mean, I had to learn how to be okay with being rejected, that if my work did not that it wasn't the best it could be, one, or either that it is being seen subjectively and differently from someone else, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't equate that with myself personally as a human being. That does not make me a human failure, which means that you have to learn. I forget now I think was it. Sorry, I had a baby like a few months ago, so the baby brain is strong. You know how the force is strong and the baby brain is very strong. So I forget who said it, but fail better. So you have to be okay with the rejection. You have to be okay with, crying through revisions and thinking this is the worst day of my life. No, there is a tomorrow. You wake up for that tomorrow to do it all over again. You have to create um, a discipline and a practice that supports that, which means having a community as well who is going through like maybe a similar process, because like Erin was saying, the same people are going through what you're going through, and you try to support each other, and then their journeys are different from your, maybe some things are similar, some things are different, but essentially you all probably want the same thing. You want to publish a book, you want to, I don't know, be a writer, all of these things. So how can you be in a community with people who want the same thing, that you are all cultivating each other, pushing each other. If anyone is an anime fan like me, they have this thing where, especially in shonen, the boys' side, where they always have the rival. Okay, you can have a literary rival of friends or whatever, and you push each other hard to make yourself better and better and better. I mean, because there is going to be jealousy, because some of your friends are going to be more successful than you, and you kind of have to be okay with that, because that is part of the journey. And maybe it's their time tomorrow and yours is next year. You don't know that. So it's just a lot. It's a lot. You have to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And you know what? You get to debut only one time, so take the time. Try to enjoy the process. Take classes. Attend workshops. Listen to panels like this. Learn from other mistakes.
Thank you so much. Yes, that's fantastic advice. I really appreciate you all being so open about your process. And so we're going to take some audience questions now. The first one I'm going to ask is from one of our YouTube listeners. Why did you decide to seek an agent instead of self-publishing? Was self-publishing ever an option for any of you? Erin, how about you?
Yeah, that's a great question. So self-publishing is really hard. It's a lot of work. And so for me, I didn't want to do all that work, like the marketing. You have to find someone to do your cover, you have to hire an editor, all of that stuff. And then also, I've been in publishing a long time. And so I was like, if I'm gonna try this, I want to be with a publisher. I want to work with, someone like that. Self-publishing, I think, is an incredible thing. There are people who are huge and are doing amazing things with it. I just knew, for me, like, I wanted to write a book and then sell it. I didn't want to then have to market it and do all of that stuff. That just wasn't something I was willing to do.
Mhm. This next question is for Sarah. Sarah, how has writing for TV impacted the writing of No One Gets to Fall Apart? And similarly, did writing a memoir influence your writing as a screenwriter?
Yeah, I mean, I think I write comedy, and I think for a long time I was kind of mad at myself that the book wasn't funnier, because I write jokes for a living. And but I kind of do think the book is funny. It's just not funny in the way that TV is funny, and I kind of have to reconcile that. So I think in terms of like how it's affected my screenwriting, I feel a lot more confident. Just like a tiny bit of background on TV writing, a lot of times, like, you're on a team, you have a boss, it's not your show. You're showing up 9 to 5 to like service someone else's vision. And I love doing that, and I'm good at it, and I'm very happy in the work that I do. But now I feel like, oh, like I wrote something that's mine, and it got published, and people seem to kind of be responding to it. Like maybe it's okay for me to like have my own voice and do this other thing that isn't the exact same thing that I've been doing, and I'd like to kind of bring that into my TV work more and see if I can find some success there. Um, yeah, with like the voice that I feel the most confident with, and is maybe not the most traditional TV writing voice.
Yeah. And so here's a question. After recently getting 2 R&Rs from agents, I've started revising again and sharing it with beta readers. Do any of you have advice on sifting through feedback and deciding what to implement? Cherry, what do you think?
Yeah, so take your time, because when you don't say yes to everything, sometimes you have to sit with the feedback and see if it's something that you agree with or not. Because don't be a yes person. Like, and it doesn't matter who is giving you the feedback. And sometimes you may make the wrong call, but that's what revision is for. And maybe you get the same feedback over and over again. Like let's say you didn't accept it the first time, but you keep getting it over and over again, right? So for example, I could not accept that people were not getting my vignettes. I mean, but they're good as, each thing. But then you have to start knowing yourself as a writer, like what is your voice, what is your style, what is it that you're trying to accomplish with the piece that you're doing. So if it's a shorter work, like a microfiction, right, like 500 words to 1,000 words, it's okay to have a vignette, to have a cliffhanger, all of that, that you settle only on language. But then if you're working on a novel, are you okay with people stopping at page 15 because they don't know what's going on? Because there will be readers who will be okay with that they just love your play on language and things like that. Are you okay with that? That also limits the kind of publishing house that could take your book, like an indie press maybe, or maybe self-publishing, which, I'm not knocking that. There was a self-published author from, I don't know, I think this was 10 years ago. I don't know if anybody remembers Amanda Hawking from like Amazon. She was #1 in Amazon. She was writing about vampires and werewolves all the time. And for $1, everybody was just buying it because this was at the Twilight craze, and the girl worked, because I was so fascinated by this at that time, that traditional publishing noticed her, and then they bought her books, and then we never heard from her again. I mean, I think they gave her $1 million or something, but it worked for her.
Mm-hmm.
So it depends. It depends on you. It depends on what you're okay with, but take your time, because again, it's not going anywhere. You have to be okay with it because it's your work and you have to stand by it.
Absolutely. Erin, I think you might have insight to this because you mentioned your book being sold in Taiwan. Someone is asking, at what point in the process did your agent or publisher sell subsidiary rights?
So I don't feel like I'm a total expert on this, but when you're offered with the publisher, you guys chime in if I'm wrong, because I could very well be wrong, but you either sell like American rights, or is it yeah, it's like North American rights or world rights. And if it's North American rights, then then your agent typically will then go on and sell to other countries. For me, we sold world rights to William Morrow, and then they have gone on and put it out to all the other countries, and then that's like a whole other thing, because I didn't know about that and I asked a lot of questions. So there are like William Morrow's or HarperCollins in other countries, but just because they bought my book in the, in the US doesn't mean they're going to buy my book in Australia or, wherever. And so there can be, you can have a book published with HarperCollins in the US, and then in Britain, it could be a totally different publisher because that's who buys you there. So you can find, I am sure if you Google it, you can find, very specific rundowns of it, but that's kind of the most knowledge I have of it personally. And then the film and TV stuff is different too. That is usually another person who comes on to handle that.
Thank you for those insights. That was more information than I had to share. Okay, so we're just going to take one more question. Suggestions for good places to find a gentle, big picture of the debut from revision to publishing. An example they gave is Poets and Writers. Do you have other outlets you all looked to get more information about this process? And oh, sorry, Sarah, what if you could share?
So I listen to a lot of podcasts. I mean, is that the question? Like media that kind of helps guide you? So I would say like kind of essential are the Paris Review interviews. Those are my Bible all through grad school, and I taught them, and I could go back to like James Baldwin's Paris Review interview, incredible. Joan Didion's is good. So those books, they're all printed, like it's a collection of interviews with the literary journal, the Paris Review, over the decades of their lifespan. And then I love the Other People podcast with Brad Listy. So he interviews authors and kind of does a forensic deep dive into their process. And there used to be a podcast on public radio here called Bookworm, I want to say. It was pretty famous. Unfortunately, I think the host is now very ill, but if you can just like find the archives of that, those were incredible interviews. You're just, sort of tailor it to your genre and your taste. But I find podcasts to be a really sort of rich resource.
And Cherry, what about you? Where did you go to look for information about this process?
So I agree with Sarah, and again, lean on in with your community, because like even the Writers League, I'm sure everybody can give you like suggestions from the Writers League. But podcasts definitely. So in fact, I'm gonna plug a new one that I just love so much. I think somebody had asked about nonfiction, because this podcast focuses on nonfiction. If you're interested, I think it's great. It's by Kiese Lemon and Disha Filial. It just came out, so they have 4 episodes right now. I mean, each of them like just gives so much information, so much insight into creativity, the process, et cetera, et cetera. And then there is, if you're looking specifically for debuts, there's, I don't know if I'm saying it right, The Beautiful, Adam Bitcage, that's another one, specifically for debuts. And then, oh my gosh, there's so many, Minorities in Podcast, in Publishing by Jen Baker, that's another one. Again, so many. And like Sarah was saying, if you can read interviews in the Paris Review and read literary journals, read books, just read widely, even out of the genre that you're working on, because there might be something in it that is useful for you. I mean, I'm always interested actually in process. So even dancers or artists, I read interviews of how they do their art, because we're all creating art. And so sometimes I find it useful to see what they're doing. In fact, if anybody has read Craft in the Real World, the Liz Lerman technique, which is from dance, that has sort of gone into the post Craft in the Real World, it's talking about critiquing people, and if you're unfamiliar, just Google like Liz Lerman technique, usually, getting away from the cone of silence, etc. Anyway, yeah, but even if you Google or just listen to one or two podcasts, then they'll mention things. And if you're taking notes or listening, you'll get other information.
That's fantastic. Well, this was wonderful. You all are so lovely. I'm so excited your books are about to be in the world. I was so lucky to get to read them before most people. They're all fantastic. And I thank you so much for taking this time to share what the journey was to get to this place. I wish you all the best of luck with your publication days coming up in October. And I cannot wait to hear all about it in November. And so, yeah, y'all have a great night and thank you for being here. Thank you to all of you who joined us tonight on Zoom and on our YouTube live stream. You could have been anywhere this evening, and we are so happy you chose to spend your time with us. I hope everyone has a really lovely evening, and I'll see you all soon.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.